Alright, you're all here for the omegaverse class, am I right?
Omega what?
I thought this was the class on clownfish territorial tactics. No.
Why is this in a garage?
Yes, well, the school wouldn't let us have the actual class on the school grounds, so here we are. Hello everybody, welcome to my YouTube channel. I'm Courtney, and today I'm talking about something a little bit different. Class is in session. I'm actually gonna keep those off because they hurt my eyes. So, today I am talking about the omegaverse. And if you don't know what that is okay, because today's video is all about what it is, how it works, how it was created, all of that. So we're gonna start by first clarifying something. This is something that I noticed as soon as I started reading Omegaverse, is that it is technically supposed to be, or kind of gives you the impression that it's based on a wolf hierarchy, but it is not. So erase all of the knowledge that you may or may not have about wolf hierarchy. I brought this. Really quick, you have alphas, and then you have betas, and then you have, I mean, technically, I don't know what that is. Technically, you also have deltas, which are like under betas, but we're gonna ignore that right now because not a lot of people know about them and it's kind of not super important. And then you have omegas. So in a wolf hierarchy, the alphas are boss. Betas are the second in command. They kind of like do everything that the alphas don't, or they're like the meat of the pack, right? And then you have omegas, who are the weakest of the pack. They're usually smaller. They get beat up a lot. They're very important in a wolf pack because omegas will actually initiate playtime. They'll initiate fight time. The wolf pack won't actually kill an omega outright because they are very technically important to the hierarchy and to the morale of a group. So now that we have what an actual wolf pack might look like, ignore it. So basically, this is going to be awkward for all of us, so you better stay. So in an omegaverse, you have two things, at least from what I've read, there are two things that always are constant. There's a hierarchy where you have men, sometimes women, who are alphas in a society. Not necessarily shifters. Sometimes they are not shifters. I used to think that you had to have shifters in an omegaverse because it is based on wolf hierarchy. So I thought that they were all like werewolf stories. They're not. So you have a hierarchy. You have the betas, the alphas, the betas, and the omegas. And the other constant in every single omegaverse book that I have read is nodding. And I'm not gonna, that's coming. That part is coming. I'm gonna explain what nodding is if you don't know. But those are the two that are always constant in an omegaverse book. The other things that I'm going to discuss may or may not be there. Other things that you might find in an omegaverse story are heat cycles. I will discuss those. Scent marking, nesting, shifters, mpreg. If you don't know what that is, that's when a male character gets pregnant. Psychic bonds and fated mates. All of those to me seem optional. They're more common in Omegaverse, but not all Omegaverse novels have them. You have a hierarchy. Like I said, you don't have to have shifters, but it usually has to do with some sort of a society, shifters or not. They could just be normal humans, normal. But there's always going to be alphas, and they're usually bigger, stronger, faster, more dominating. And then you have betas, which are kind of like your general population. And then you have omegas, who are usually kind of small. They need a lot of taking care of. They're not well treated in society, kind of like omegas in a wolf pack. They are they're thought of as the lowest of the low, which I always thought was weird because omegas in omegaverse are usually the only ones that can mate with alphas. So they're extremely valuable but also treated like shit. So I never understood that. But that is generally what is going on in that hierarchy. The alphas all also have another thing in common, and that is they have knots. First, I need to explain to you guys what knotting is, because that is a constant in all like omegaverse books that I have read. This is where things are gonna get fun, and by fun I mean weird. Imagine that every male in this society has a pickle. Now, most pickles are normal pickles. Now imagine that you have alphas, and the alphas, I couldn't find a real donut at the gas station. All I found was this. So just imagine that this is a normal donut. Actually, I'm gonna rip it. Oh, perfect. Okay, so imagine that there is a select few males that possess pickles. It's not gonna work. It's not gonna work. Some males possess pickles with donuts. Okay, right? Okay. Or a donut like near the ball sack, the figurative ball sack, or not the figurative ball sack. They have pickles with donuts, okay? They have large pickles, okay? With donuts. Now also imagine that that all women can only eat normal pickles. But if you are an omega woman or male, there are a lot of books out there that have male omegas. There is a select few that can eat pickles with donuts. Very select few. That was all very weird for me. We're gonna move on. In other words, alphas have dongs with knots on the ends. And what that means, let me draw you a better visual. So, here's a normal dong, right? Now an alpha is gonna look more like this. But also, when he is in a mating frenzy, he will grow it is called a knot on the end. What this does is it locks, here, okay, so this is his other part, right? Actually, they're probably really very large. But imagine only omegas can take that, right? So they do their thing. They go into a lot of omegaverse books, the female or the omega will do something where they go into heat, and that means they really need to get all that sexual energy out. They really need to mate. Alphas are usually the only ones that can answer that. And in a lot of omegaverse, when they go into heat and the heat is not answered, it's very painful and is actually very detrimental to their health, like their mental and physical health. So they gotta like do the thing, right? So when they're doing the thing and they're about to finish the thing, this grows and it will lock the two together for an extended period of time until it deflates and fills the omega with essential things for baby making. That is what knotting is. We're gonna move on to nesting. And nesting is when a female or omega, like it can be male or female. Nesting is usually when the omega needs to feel comfortable or safe. And because she has an alpha, usually it's when she has an alpha, and she needs to fill a space with things that smell like him. It's usually like sheets and clothes and things like that smell like him, and she'll make a nest out of it, and that is where she feels safest. And so when she's in distress, she will sit in her nest of dirty things. So that's fairly common in Omegaverse. Not needed, but common. There are a lot of Omegaverse books that are about shifters, which is understandable because it is a wolf-like hierarchy that is kind of portrayed in Omegaverse. So to me, it always made sense. The first Omegaverse book that I ever read was not shifters. I thought it was going to be because, again, like when somebody says alpha omega, you think of wolves. So I was kind of surprised that the first book that I read had nothing to do with shifters whatsoever. So there's a bunch of other things. Like I said, there's scent marking, there's fated mates, mpreg, a lot of other things that may or may not be in Omegaverse. But we're going to go back to the very beginning of where Omegaverse started, and we have one show to blame for this entire genre, and that is Supernatural. The Omegaverse was built on concepts that already exist, and those concepts are, for example, and this is actually from an article that I read from somebody. I don't actually remember the person that I read this article from, but for example, Ponfar, I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, because don't hate me, but I'm not really a Star Trek fan. Ponfar from Star Trek is where Vulcans every 7 years enter into a mating cycle that must be answered, or there will be a chemical or hormonal imbalance that will severely affect them physically and mentally, and sometimes damage them to the point of death, which is largely similar to a heat cycle in the Omegaverse, how the heat cycles usually work. If it's not answered by an alpha and the omega goes into a heat cycle and does not do anything about it, they sometimes can get really sick or really damaged. There are some Omegaverse novels that I've read where the omegas will actually take drugs or like pills to help suppress all those hormones because of how strong and how prominent they are. And if they don't have an alpha, then they obviously don't want to go through a heat cycle and risk their lives. And also in a lot of Omegaverse, the omegas can sometimes be afraid of alphas because they fear that they will just be claimed and used, and their sexual needs and their because usually when they're in their heat cycles, they are very like absent-minded. It's more of like a very instinctual animal thing, and their brain kind of shuts off, and they're not really in control of themselves anymore. And so a lot of Omegaverse books involve omegas that don't want to be omegas because they don't want that part of themselves to take over their free will. So they take suppressants, and that's very common in a lot of books of this genre. Let's go back to how it started. I said it started with Supernatural. In mid-2010, someone shared a writing prompt on LiveJournal, and if you don't know what LiveJournal is, I am sorry. Maybe you shouldn't be watching this because you're probably too young. So somebody wrote a prompt on LiveJournal saying that alphas would have knots and bitch males would not have knots. It's a good time to mention that Omegaverse technically started out as male on male, and it kind of expanded from there, but we'll get into that. This prompt, this idea or this concept, inspired somebody to write fan fiction. It focused on Jared Padalecki's character, I don't remember his name, and Jensen Ackles' character as an alpha and omega pair. After that, which is a little bit gross because they are brothers, right? Maybe they're just talking about the actors. Hopefully they're just talking about the actors and they just shipped the actors, because that's a whole nother can of worms that I don't want to get into. Soon after that, the Omegaverse spread to other fandoms such as Sherlock, Teen Wolf, makes sense because they're wolves, Doctor Who, and even the Avengers. In 2012, the fated mates kind of aspect of it kind of made its way into Omegaverse. And in 2014, the Omegaverse gained traction in Japan by becoming more common when the first ABO, which is Alpha Beta Omega, manga was published. And that was in 2015. I know there's a lot of dates here. It's all like, you know, in 2016, the power dynamic started taking form, and it introduced a bite or a mark into the genre, which would chemically or biologically bond a couple together. And I've read a lot of Omegaverse where they actually do that. So the alpha will bite or do something to the omega to mark them as theirs. There's a lot of scent stuff in Omegaverse. Like, they're very fond of the omega smelling of the alpha to let others know that they belong to each other. And biting was a big part of it, is a big part of it in a lot of books. Not all, but a lot. And in 2017, the genre exploded across fan fiction with 70,000 fan fictions published on one site alone. And then it expanded after that to commercial works, and by 2020, which is really not that long ago, 3 years ago, realize that? 3 years ago. In 2020, there were over 200 novels that were published on Amazon that were in the Omegaverse genre. And then the world caught on to that and they made it a whole thing. Like, it just became a whole thing, and now it is mainstream in books that are being published by publishing houses. Like, it is a huge genre. And I just want to say right now that I'm actually a fan of the genre. Okay, it might sound like the way I'm talking, it might sound like it's like I think it's stupid. No, I'm actually a fan of the genre. I've read a lot of omegaverse. I'm a little bit picky about my omegaverse, but I've read a lot of it. There are a lot of really good stories out there. So there's technically a lot of controversy surrounding omegaverse, and a lot of people condemned it, especially in the beginning, because they said that it's sick and reinforces patriarchal values and R-word culture, which I understand, because in a lot of omegaverse novels, the alphas severely mistreat the omegas. And I just said that I was picky about my omegaverse novels, and that's one of the things I'm picky about. I am into romance, and a lot of omegaverse stuff doesn't seem like romance to me. It seems almost abusive, which, as a romance reader, you can read whatever you want. I will not judge you, but that is not my style. That theme where the alpha is very like abusive and domineering over the omega, and the omega is very meek and breakable and small and doesn't stick up for themselves, and I don't really care for that, but that is very common. So I can understand where that controversy comes from, but at the same time, it's literature. It is fiction. Get over yourselves. That's beside the point. That is my own opinion. Take it or leave it. The power imbalances between the genders and references to animal traits and mating habits is considered revolting to a lot of people. I also understand that. There have been a lot of omegaverse books that I have read that I just thought was very wrong, and I was reading it and I was just like, this is wrong. This is weird. Why am I reading this? I will never tell people that I read this, but now I'm telling you guys and I'm teaching you all about it, so who the fuck cares? So then you have the other side of this whole argument, and those are the people that are saying strips us of our bodies, bringing us down to a more instinctual or primal state, eliminating gender roles in many cases, since a large number of omegaverse is between same-sex characters. And I didn't mention before, but I mean, I sort of did. I mentioned that omegaverse started as male on male, and then it kind of, I don't know when, but it kind of graduated to female and female. And then it graduated from there as being like male and female. To be honest, before I made this video, I was just planning to talk about what omegaverse was from my own experience. And then I actually put time into researching it, and I found all this like background and everything, and I thought it would be really cool to tell you guys. Anyways, Melina said, quote, "The features of the ABO genre, ABO alpha, beta, omega, genre allow for an exploration," my voice is getting really stuffy now because like I feel like I need to blow my nose, allows for an exploration of themes of power, desire, pleasure, intimacy, romance, control, and consent in a variety of ways. And it's used by writers and readers as a tool to think through consent issues in unequal relationships. So what I got from that is that a lot of people gravitate towards omegaverse because, despite the fact that alphas are up here being alphas and being dominating and so much stronger than everyone else in society, when they find an omega who, like I said, is typically treated poorly and treated like the bottom of the barrel, which again I don't understand because they're the only ones that can have alpha babies. But when an alpha finds an omega, you know, they're kind of cruel, but at the same time they take care of them and they protect them, and they, you know, will go through these intense heat cycles where they just have to have sex like all day, every day for like 3 days. But then the alphas are there to literally like give them massages and give them baths and make sure their nest is nice and comfortable and full of things that smell like them. And to be honest, I can understand why that might be appealing to some people. All in all, there are the simple versions of omegaverse. And then you have all of this like really complicated stuff that goes on in omegaverse that is actually really interesting. Despite everything that I said, I know a lot of it probably sounded really goofy, but I do really, really enjoy the genre, and I have a video coming up where I'm going to recommend some omegaverse books. My taste in omegaverse is usually, I don't like the omega to be or I don't like the alpha to be extremely abusive, which is very common in omegaverse. And I don't like sweetverse. So sweetverse is something that kind of like spawned from omegaverse, and it's where the omega alpha relationship is very sweet and less dominating. My taste is in between. I like domination, but I also don't want sweet omegaverse, like, you know, where the alpha is just like so cute, and you know, the only dominating trait about him is that he's kind of tall. Like, I just realized I had that in my entire video. Hopefully you guys weren't too distracted by that. I hope you guys all learned something. I hope you like and subscribe to my channel. And I hope I see you all next time.